Hello, I'm Ray Farmer, Director of the South Carolina Department of Insurance and current President of the NAIC. It is certainly good to be with you today.
So I'm Mike Cheney, Commissioner of Insurance in the great state of Mississippi. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. I've got a legislative history of serving in the House and the Senate and the state legislature, and for the past 13 years, I've been the Commissioner of Insurance for the state of Mississippi.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Scott White, and I'm the Commissioner of Insurance for Virginia. It's great to be able to join you this afternoon and talk a little bit about the impact of COVID in Virginia as our state insurance department handled it, and just talk about some of the experiences we had and some of the lessons learned. The first question I've been asked to talk about is, can you share any particular challenges that you saw in each of your states as a result of the pandemic? And I can talk about Virginia, but the first thing that comes to mind with that is how shared many of the experiences all of the states have, particularly the ones I spoke with the commissioners in the Southeast zone, and I know we all came from the same perspective in terms of what we had to deal with when the COVID pandemic began in March and up to today, what we're still dealing with. A couple of things jump out at me was, just dealing with the impact of the remote working environment that all states had to adjust to and adapt to, and what we call the new normal. In Virginia, in Richmond, where we have our state offices, a lot of people commute in from what are pretty rural areas. And so in those situations, sometimes internet access is not as reliable or as available. So we had to deal with that. We had to get the proper equipment out to those employees who, for example, didn't have laptops. And we had to do that very quickly because this came and we had to get out of the building, and we weren't 100% prepared at the time. So we decided to get out and then triage afterwards. And the other thing I would mention is the fact in Virginia, we had the same issues as in other states with our regulated industry, in particular, the insurance agents, those applicants who were trying to obtain their license. And of course, they have to take exams. There were challenges for them to get into these testing centers. Unlike other states, Virginia did not provide the commissioner with the authority to provide temporary licenses. And so we had some real challenges there. And what we were able to do is we were actually transitioning to a new vendor who did offer remote testing, and that somewhat solved our problem. But it was pretty touch and go there for a while, and I was envious of those commissioners in those states that had that licensing, that temporary licensing authority. So we are taking steps in our upcoming legislative session to remedy that and to provide the commissioner with that authority.
Certainly there were challenges, but I think we were fortunate not to have any large glaring issues arise in the industry as a result of the pandemic. At the NAIC, we've been saying here lately that when things are at their worst, the NAIC is at its best. And I think that in this instance, that applies to the insurance industry as well. It is our moment as industry folks, as regulators, it's our moment to shine. So our first priority was ensuring access to testing for COVID-19 and to medical care, both for the treatment of the virus and for regular routine care. So like many of my colleagues throughout the country, I reached out to our health insurance industry first. We set up a dedicated web page to provide information to our citizens and healthcare providers and stakeholders about how our health insurers were responding. We quickly made this kind of a one-stop shop for insurance-related information on the pandemic. Certainly followed the lead of our governor, Henry McMaster, and stood next to him when early in March, when he declared a state of emergency, and at that time asked insurers to make sure testing was available. There were no costs for testing. Out-of-pocket costs were that the consumers didn't have to cover in anything related to the pandemic. And so that's worked well. I issued a bulletin right after that and to the industry, told them I expected them to work with consumers on premium payment deadlines, renewals, access to telemedicine and early prescription refills, among other things. And then after we heard from the industry to some degree, we issued several bulletins to allow temporary producer licenses to be issued and to provide flexibility relating to certain regulatory filings. But one of the most visible ways in which the insurance industry and regulators work together to aid consumers was in the area of the auto insurance premium relief. Regulators, we certainly did here in our state, and other regulators worked with insurers to get the money back in the hands of policyholders as a result of the substantial decrease in driving due to government shutdowns and shelter-in-place orders. We did what we were asked to do, and we stayed home for a period of time, and that was certainly reflected in fewer claims for auto insurers and subsequently refunds to reflect that to policyholders.
I can. The pandemic caught a lot of state agencies by surprise. Most of the agencies had some type of strategic operating plan in place. The Department of Insurance, by nature, being in the insurance business, and I'm also the state fire marshal, had a strategic operating plan in place. That means a 5-year plan that we review every year and update. So we had a lot of things in place to continue operating remotely, and we knew what to do during the pandemic simply because part of our mission was to be able to continue operations, one, at the Department of Insurance, and number two, at our facility for the State Fire Academy. So we were prepared not only with training what to do as first responders, which we have that responsibility to some limited degree, in case there's a catastrophic event, not just hurricanes, but earthquakes, tornadoes, terrorist attacks, et cetera. And we had a lot of personal protective equipment on board. So at that time, it wasn't called PPE, it was called masks and respirators and gloves and et cetera. So PPE just encompasses all of those things. And we shared a lot of that information and excellent material and assets that we had stored with our MEMA folks, which is the Mississippi Emergency Management Association, the equivalent of FEMA on a state level. So we were prepared and for that. And in addition, I have under our directive 27 law enforcement officers who are my state fire marshals, and they were used to working remotely with iPads and with laptop computers. And my examination division was in the same boat. So it was natural for us to just bleed right over into remote operations, which we'll probably get into a little bit. And we were able to operate remotely without having to come to the office physically. And it was easy for us to get laptops out to our directors. They were all used to operating remotely. So we use a virtual private network. If you don't know what that is, I'm not sure I do sometimes, but it's a network that we use within the department so we can communicate and get access to the files that we have stored in the building and to remote access. It's kind of like the clouds to some degree.
How prepared were you, and how did the execution of any pre-planning go in your states?
I think we were prepared to handle things to an extent. Of course, there were lessons learned and practices now in place, but a pandemic that shuts down everything is certainly unheard of. And so everyone was only as prepared as we knew to be. But our department's been resilient. We really haven't missed a beat in the months following the state's shutdown. No, we are used to natural catastrophes here in South Carolina. We're on the coast, and for the last 5 years, we've had something. We've either had a hurricane or a flood or flood with a hurricane. So we have certain protocols in place for emergencies such as that. And so we utilize those. We put all of those plans in place, but the pandemic brought, an extra factor to the equation in that, almost overnight, everybody needed to work from home. So our IT department did an outstanding job. They worked around the clock for a few days to get everyone set up to have a successful remote plan in place. We bought laptops from the state surplus store and were able to provide our employees a way to work from home and safely. We were able to move into a digital space at a rapid pace and really kept the business of insurance running here in South Carolina.
So for Virginia, the simple answer to that is I would say we were pretty prepared. Like most states, we have a business continuity plan, and we had been working on it pretty regularly. So overall, I think we did a pretty good job. What we decided to do was, in our own case, was Virginia. The Bureau of Insurance is part of a larger agency, the State Corporation Commission. So the Bureau actually made the decision to transition to remote working before the overall agency, the larger agency. We decided to get out of the building sooner rather than later, even though we weren't 100% prepared to do so. As I indicated, we weren't fully ready to have laptops for every employee. For those who had desktops, we had to get them Wi-Fi adapters, and that was a challenge as well. But we felt it was better to make sure that our staff was safe, their families were safe. And so we felt, let's get everybody out of the building, and then we can decide how we triage this and make sure everybody can do their jobs. And again, I was very proud of the job my staff did in getting everybody the laptops, the Wi-Fi adapters, the printers, whatever it might be, just to make sure we had as few people in the building as possible. And again, we are a state that is still remote working, almost 100%. We have people that come in and pick up checks and things of that nature, but we are almost a virtual 100% remote working environment, and we think it's working very well. Although I do have to mention, it is a challenge for our employees, particularly right now in the fall. We have we have a lot of employees that have children, and that's been a real challenge with childcare. So we've tried to be as adaptable as possible, as flexible as possible, and supportive as possible. But it's an ongoing challenge, and I think a lot of us are eager to get back into the building at some point, whenever that might be.
Can you describe the most notable issue you experienced while working with the insurance industry through the pandemic?
The most noticeable thing that came up was initially, I wasn't sure that some of the industry folks were as prepared as we were as a state agency, but we worked through a lot of that. We had the first COVID case of any state agency, and we caught it on a Monday and did not let the investigator, it was one of my investigators, come to work. It was, I can't remember the exact dates. I think it was March the 6th. So on Monday, he was sick and he called in. We said, don't come in because we'd been looking at COVID, and we couldn't get him tested. We found out that the Department of Health didn't know what to do. Our research centers weren't real sure. And my ACE general counsel spent an enormous amount of time trying to figure out what to do with folks that were sick and where to send them to get tested. And what I'm telling you is we got hit, number one, first with COVID before any of the other state agencies, before MEMA or FEMA ever knew what was going on. So we were ahead of the curve a little bit, and we put the protocol in place. And I worked over a weekend to write that protocol, to have it in place as to what should be done at the department. And that meant everybody had to have a mask. Social distancing was new at that time. What to do if you had symptoms, and the symptoms were totally different in February and March than what they are today, at least from what we told folks. So from a state agency point of view, we learned specifically how to operate an agency remotely and how to respond to the pandemic without ever losing stride in anything that we do. In other words, we could exist under any catastrophic event, including a pandemic, as long as we had internet access or communication access.
So what I would like to focus on for purposes of Virginia is our role at the national level with the NAIC in chairing the E Committee, the Financial Condition Committee. because we had some real issues that developed very early on in the pandemic. In late March, we realized that some of the issues that were developing along the lines of borrowers for real estate holdings or policyholders with their insurance contracts were going to or were already facing challenges in paying those premiums, meeting their mortgage payment obligations simply because of the unemployment that was beginning to occur. And as the pandemic developed and we had these shutdowns in the economy. So it became a real challenge, and particularly in the life insurance industry that has a lot of holdings in real estate or commercial mortgage-backed securities. They wanted to provide relief to their policyholders and to their borrowers and industry in general with respect to premiums. But obviously that had impacts in terms of accounting, reporting, and also their risk-based capital. So we worked very carefully with the industry so those wouldn't be classified as what they call other than temporary impairments. Everybody recognized the unique nature of this event, and so we did reach an agreement so that it would not impact their accounting reporting or their risk-based capital on a temporary basis. We're trying to encourage them to grant that relief to their borrowers, to their policyholders. Same is true in the case of premium refunds. How do you account for those for accounting purposes? Is it an underwriting expense or is it a return of premium? These are important, but technical but important questions that needed to be answered. And so we had to work through those. But again, I think there was mutual agreement that we needed to balance the ability of carriers to grant that relief, but also to make sure that these rules that have been in place to protect consumers in the forms of being able to having carriers pay claims down the road wasn't jeopardized. So we're proud of the work we've done with respect to that issue, and that's what jumps out at me in terms of the biggest issue we faced in Virginia.
Well, when I was appointed by former Governor Nikki Haley to this position 8 years ago, she gave me 2 instructions. She says, grow the business of insurance in this state and provide great customer service to all of our customers, especially our consumers. So when the pandemic hit, you had folks graduating from college, needing a job, needing to take examinations to become a licensed agent or an adjuster. So this certainly wasn't the time for people to be unable to get to work. So we issued a bulletin to allow for the issuance of temporary producer licenses, which allowed folks to take those to get a license temporarily. I'm not so sure I had all that authority, but I wasn't going to stand in the way of folks trying to get a job in this stressful time in the history of our country. The temporary licenses came to an end in September, but we've learned from that. We've learned that we can do remote testing in addition to in-person testing. So the remote proctoring, the remote testing will continue. I think that will be refined a little bit. But in the end, we kind of had a bet around the department of how many temporary licenses we would issue. To show you why I'm not in the betting business, I guess that there would be no more than 10 temporary licenses issued. When everything was said and done, we had issued 1,991 temporary licenses. And so I'm proud of the effort that this department made in making sure there was not a stumbling block for new agents coming into the system.
The next question I've been asked to address is what would the one thing be that had you known before the pandemic you would have done or prepared for it differently? I'm sure I'm not alone in saying I really wish we had prepared our employees a little bit better for the length of time we might be out of the office. Certainly nobody could have predicted that. So I'm not kicking myself, but ideally we would have had time to address that. I will say, like a lot of state agencies, we had kind of a skeptical view of remote working arrangements. Was it allowed? Yes, but it was not encouraged, certainly. And so we really had to adapt to a new mindset when we left the building. And really, you know, there have been a number of challenges. Obviously, electronic communication with the industry has been a challenge. But I think overall, it's had a very positive impact. I think we all realize now, the Bureau of Insurance, as well as our larger agency, the State Corporation Commission, that work can get done. Productivity doesn't necessarily have to decline or decrease when you're working remotely. If you can meet these challenges and make sure everybody has the technology and equipment they need. And, you know, there's always trade-offs, right? When you're talking about remote working, you don't have the same collaborative ability to sit down in an office, a conference room, and work through an issue. Doing it remotely over Zoom, it's more difficult, but it can be done. So I wish we had had that technology more in place before, so we could have kind of adapted to it earlier. But I'm proud of the fact that we were able to adjust on the fly, like I know other states have. And we're very proud of the work we've done since, again, late March when we left the building. We've met every challenge, including a very long legislative session, and building up, in the case of Virginia, a new state-based exchange within our own agency during that time. So we've met a number of challenges, again, that if you'd asked me a year ago whether this could have been done through a 100% remote working environment, I would have been very skeptical, but I've been proven wrong in that respect. So what that's also done, I would say, is it's accelerated the process of eliminating almost all of our paper-dependent processes. So that was something that we were probably a little bit behind when compared to other states, but just by virtue of necessity, we've had to accelerate and move into a more paperless work environment. So we're proud of the work we've done there.
Well, certainly a challenge to have our entire team go from being in the office every day to being remote almost overnight. So we had to work quickly, and our IT team had to put into some long days and weekends to get us ready for this transition. But like I said earlier, our IT team really outdid themselves to get us the equipment, resources that we needed to make the transition. So it was hard on our team as individuals. Like many of you, I would imagine it was a challenge for some to make that transition to working from home, especially when, you're also trying to take care of kids, educate kids, when they weren't able to go to school. So it was hard not to see everyone every day and have that connection. So now we've transitioned everyone to a new laptop docking station. We've upgraded our IT equipment during the pandemic. So we'll be prepared in the future. We've instituted weekly agency-wide emails to keep everyone updated and connected. So we've learned a lot, and we'll utilize that going forward. Once we're all back in the office, which I hope is sometime soon, we'll sit down and decide what worked better when we were remote and how we can incorporate that in our everyday lives at this point. So it continues to be a learning experience.
If I had things to do over again, I would have had a written protocol in place well before the pandemic hit. I thought we had it covered in the standard operating procedure or strategic plan, or what we call the long-term strategic plan, and we did not. And I take full responsibility for not having that done. So what we have done is we've talked to other agencies, and they're all kind of doing what we've done. We're saying, look, we need a long-term plan, what to do in case of a nuclear attack, a pandemic, natural occurring catastrophic event. We need a plan for all of these. What happens if you have an airplane crash into the state capitol, unintentionally or unintentionally? And to the agencies, how do you operate and what do you do? So we already had things in place, like all of the records, everything that we do on our computers is backed up on a daily basis. And I'm going to talk in general terms because we have some internal protocol that's not public, but we do have backups. and we can hit the ground running if we're hacked on the computers. We would have a little different security system in place for our computer networks. One, and number two, we would be better equipped to operate remotely from the homes.
What do you think has changed so substantially, or which has been forever impacted by this experience?
I think we've learned a great deal about what we're capable of, personally and professionally, throughout the country. Certainly here in South Carolina and at the Department of Insurance, we've learned a great deal about technology and its useful place in the workplace. Working remotely has shown that perhaps the structure of day-to-day work can be changed to offer a better work-life balance for team members. But until school is fully back in session and there's a vaccine that everyone trusts and takes, I think we'll continue to see this modified work schedule we have here at the department and everyone else has. So we're working on staggered start times and cycling our days that are work remotely, so that we never really have any more than a third of our team in the office here at one time.
Well, what comes to my mind immediately is the way we address health issues with health insurance will be impacted greatly simply because we are using telemedicine. We were issued our first bulletin out of the department, wasn't on P&C or life or anything. It was on health insurance, and it said that you had to be able to utilize telemedicine. And many of the health insurers did not want to work with the bulletin. And I simply said, you will work with it or we'll get a restraining order and make you work with them. And they knew we were serious. So the last carrier to fall in that category took them an hour to get their attitudes correct. And we still have issues with telemedicine being accepted by all the carriers. But what we have found that it's a paradigm shift from the way you handle emergency health care. If telemedicine can eliminate somebody going to an office and being exposed to COVID, and it can eliminate double charging. It can lighten the patient to the ability to talk to their family practitioner to get their prescription drugs renewed. And if the family practitioner is very familiar with that patient's case, they may be able to tell them what they need to do, whether it's a sore throat or it may be a symptom of COVID. So the family practitioners, the physicians were all on board with what we were doing on telemedicine. And what it's done is reduce the cost and the ability to have a high cost to deliver healthcare. And it's increased our ability to deliver healthcare in the rural parts of the state of Mississippi. So that's number one. We've learned a lot of things of what can be done on health insurance to keep premiums from going up. The other part of this was that we had to hit the ground running, figuring out what we would do about licensing. Now, we license on a 2-year rotation period for agents, and we license every year on COAs, the certificates of needs. Well, that's not what you call it. It's called a certificate of authority to operate within the state. And we issue over 600,000 licenses out of this department every year. So we immediately knew that we had to have some way to issue those licenses without having people to retake the test, to stay current. So we did mass emails and mass communication saying, keep your dues paid, not your dues, but your fees paid to keep your license up. Number one. Number two, if you're taking the courses online, to take the test, you need a proctor. And so we've got to work out how we will have a proctor, a remote proctor to take a test. And we figured that out. And we issued temporary license for anyone that had taken the courses for P&C, life and health, and hadn't actually received their license because they hadn't been tested. You've got to realize that as a regulator, a lot of times when you're doing testing for agents, the testing authorities will make the test strong or ask trick questions. They're multiple choice. And I've often wondered if they do that to get repeat business and keep their revenue stream up. So a lot of things have changed, and the way we do the licensing side and how we do renewal. So that's just one part there. And then I've talked about the strategic plan and the things that we've done. So I hope that gives you an idea of what's changed. On the life and health side, uh, life side, I don't know how the life insurance companies are doing the exams when they have to have a physical exam to issue a life policy, but they've utilized telemedicine, which we've authorized to do a lot of that. Number three, on the PNC side, my staff, and I've got a wonderful staff on the consumer side, has been able to address claims issues remotely. We've increased the utilization of drone technology for roof damage, especially when you're in a state that's prone to a lot of tornadoes. And we've increased the ability of agents to use and companies to use adjusters remotely and to use new technology. And that just simply means using your cell phone to look at damage across the internet. And that at least gets some money into the consumer's hands. And then when you get a chance, you can go out and visit the property. So a lot of things have changed, and we use the technology we learned from COVID for some of those claims. We knew what we had done in March of 2020, and we utilized that technology in April of 2020 when we had back-to-back tornadoes within 2 weeks. It did a lot of damage in a narrow bandwidth, but for a very long stretch. So we had like 80 miles of tornado damage, millions of dollars, and our director and deputy director were able to hit the ground running on those claim settlements.
So when I think about what has changed substantially or perhaps forever impacted by this experience, one thing I think about is a project that was going on in our agency when the pandemic hit. It was a large scale study of our office, an office planning study for space considerations. We were thinking very seriously about transitioning from an agency in an older building that had a lot of walls and a lot of offices to an open workspace. And there was a lot of concern about that and the transit, particularly among the older employees, about what that would look like in terms of privacy and just having enough space in general to do your job. I think this is going to be very interesting to see how this develops. Obviously, the concerns about whether it's the COVID-19 virus or other viruses down the road. I think what everybody hears and reads about is these open space office environments that were so popular and so trendy may be reconsidered. And I think that I do think that is going to be the case. That's just a guess on my part. And I do think even before that, we found value in having our own office space and having conference rooms and privacy to do, in a lot of cases, the critical thinking that can only be done without distractions. Now, there are certainly jobs that within our agency where that's not required, and I think you very well may see those folks transition more to a remote work environment permanently. So, you think about all these things. Everybody has different opinions, but I think as it shakes out, the trend will be there will be more remote learning on a permanent basis, and there may be somewhat of a reevaluation of the benefits of open office space. So we will see. And again, certainly the move and the acceleration to a paperless work environment that was underway in every state insurance department, certainly in Virginia, again, it forced us to do things that would have taken a lot longer. And I view that as a real positive. So the next question I was asked to address is, did you see any remarkable issues coming from the consumers in your state? When you think about the consumer, the impact on consumers of COVID-19 in the insurance area, there were a number that came up, obviously. Payment for COVID testing, telehealth issues. If you're a small business owner, you were facing perhaps a denial of your business interruption claim. And I was constantly asking my staff, my deputy commissioners for property and casualty or life and health to go and reach out to the folks, the consumer services folks and with their boots on the ground, what were they hearing? And this was really the most remarkable thing from my standpoint, was really the lack of issues that we're getting, the lack of complaints, really, in Virginia at least, was very interesting to me. We weren't getting the types of complaints I would have expected. When I asked and pressed about what types of complaints were we getting, it was kind of what you might expect, which it took longer for claims to be handled properly, just because, again, the insurance companies were also transitioning to a remote environment, and what might be expected was it took them longer to process claims and perform other functions than it otherwise would have. But that was the big takeaway for me. What I think explains that partly is I do think from what we observed was the insurance companies recognized the pandemic for what it was, as something that needed to be addressed quite seriously, and they devoted all their resources into making sure consumers had their questions answered, because these questions that arose were novel, not only for the carriers, but also for us as state regulators. And we, as insurance regulators, realized we needed to be more proactive, at least in the case of Virginia, than we normally were. So, for example, we set up a resource web page that was directed, part of it was directed to the industry, other parts were directed to consumers, to get the information, push it out as quickly as possible. Again, in this environment, questions were coming up. Who's an essential personnel for purposes of insurance agents? Can they go out and write policies with this governor's order in place? And again, the number of issues around coverage that consumers were experiencing. We didn't get a lot. And again, I think part of that was they probably could go to the web page and get that information. They could get it from their agent. But again, we worked very collaboratively with the industry. We had a war team internally that was a war room team that would gather questions and sit down with our attorneys and try to answer them. But again, the overall goal there was to kind of identify issues very quickly and get that answers to the questions out on the website or to consumers in whatever fashion as quickly as possible.
For the most part, insurance companies have been helping consumers by covering the testing we spoke about earlier, working with them on premium payments and refunding portions on car insurance premiums. We've had a few complaints come in from customers regarding COVID-19, but not very many. Certainly, I think one of the largest concerns has been from the business owners that thought their business interruption coverage would replace their lost income due to the pandemic. But of course, that isn't limited to our state. We've unfortunately had to keep in mind that bad actors will take advantage of these challenging times to try to take advantage of people. So we've warned our consumers about scams around possible vaccinations or coverage that might target those who are extremely vulnerable. We also learned that the claims handling process from insurance companies can be different. We've said a lot that the forces of nature don't really care that we're in the middle of a pandemic. So in April, our state experienced some horrific tornadoes throughout the state, but certainly up in the northwestern part of our state. And so adjusters were not able to get out in a timely fashion. So they, let the policyholders go through their house, or what was left of some of the houses, with their cell phone showing what the damage was and documenting the damage. And so that sped up the claims handling process. So I think in the future, you'll see more of that. We've had use of drones. That's been coming about here lately in any way. So we saw a lot of technology being used in situations that otherwise the claim process would have taken a long time, but it was able to accommodate our consumers and the company's policyholders by speeding up the process.
As a regulator, what are some positive items or things that you see as a result of the pandemic?
I see the fact that we can operate a lot more efficiently in some particular areas of regulation by letting people work remotely. It gives you an extra 2 hours a day if you have to travel a lot to work. It gives people freedom to move around. You have the downside of that is you don't have the personal contact that you may need. But if you're an examiner, that's not an issue. If you're in the P&C side on claims, that can be an issue because a lot of that is personal relationships. That's the downside. But the positive side is that we've learned that we can operate a lot leaner and quicker than what we've been able to do before. We're a lot more agile and quick to solve a problem that we couldn't do before. Things that used to take us 3 weeks to settle, we can settle in 3 hours now. It's just amazing. And if you had those personal relationships already prior to COVID-19 coming around, or the coronavirus in March of 2020, it really made your life easy. And I will tell you, my directors and deputy directors tell me that they're really pleased with the ability to work with the companies. What we found is kind of a paradigm shift from the way we used to operate to how we operate today. And I think it's here. A lot of those shifts are here to stay. P&C ratings are going to be the same way too.
It's been truly remarkable to see how industry leaders and regulatory leaders come together to work on behalf of the consumers during this time. I think I speak for all of us when I say each regulator's first priority during all of this was protecting consumers and reducing unnecessary insurance hurdles for them. I'm proud of how we've all worked together to certainly to this point. I think we've all also learned how to be resilient in uncertain times. You know, no one has ever seen this before, how to be innovative, think outside the box in terms of how we get work done. And I think we all, at least, hopefully, we've learned to be a bit more flexible, maybe a bit more patient. Some of us still need to learn that. You know, patient with ourselves and with others, as we often have had to turn personal and professional priorities on a dime to focus in a different direction or allow for parents to be home with children.
So in terms of what the positive that came from this, what I would focus on is how surprisingly well the industry and regulators work together in addressing the issues that arose. You know, whether it was you know, identifying issues for health insurance coverage, whether it was COVID testing, telehealth claims, or you know, providing relief to borrowers or policyholders and making sure that that was not had an adverse impact on a company's accounting or risk-based capital. There was not always agreement, but frequently, even when there was disagreement, everybody at the end of the day understood that, you know, with this COVID pandemic, we were dealing with something that we've never dealt with, and the ripple effects of that, whether the economic fallout, and I would go so far as to say, you know, the protests that occurred in the summer, along with everything else, it's been a unique year for all of us, and everybody realizes the stakes and the importance of the issues and its impact on insurance. So we all took it very seriously, and I think that where there may have been disagreement that led to a lack of resolution, you did not see that as much this year, and I think that was a good thing. We came to the table with the industry. We made sure the consumer representatives were there, and I think we erred on the side of protecting consumers whenever there was a disagreement. At least that was the goal. So, you know, another positive thing I would touch upon is, again, the changes to our work environment as a result of this pandemic, as a result of us having to work remotely. I think it's certainly the case that there will lead to permanent changes. Doesn't mean 100% of us are going to be working remotely a year from now when there's a vaccine, but certainly there's a shift that started that I think will continue, and I think that's for the better. What we have to do is to remember that there are going to be employees who want to continue to work in an office, those who want to work in a remote working environment, and what's the most effective way to do that. At the end of the day, productivity results have to be there, and we have to balance that with the needs of folks who, again, depending on how long this pandemic lasts, have to care for children or caregivers for relatives. We have to be cognizant of that. The most important thing I preach is communication. Whether if you're a supervisor, you're reaching out to your staff and making sure that they have what they need to do, what they have to do their jobs properly, and making sure their mental health is where it needs to be in these stressful times. So communication with your staff, communication with the industry, consumers. If you can do that and do it on a regular basis and treat that as a priority, generally speaking, you've done a good job, I think.
And lastly, Commissioner, what do you see as future challenges or issues that concern yourself and your staff?
Well, I think the biggest challenge I have is we communicate as a regulator with other regulators throughout the various 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the 5 territories. And we do this usually on a regular basis, at least 3 to 8 times a year. That's not been possible except by Zoom or GoTo or WebEx or Cisco or whatever format you're using.
We want to continue to make sure our consumers have access to fair and competitive coverage, don't fall prey to scams that can circulate during times of crisis like this pandemic. We want to make sure companies stay solvent as testing and treatment for COVID-19 continues and economic shifts continue to happen. But mainly, my priority is to keep our staff safe and our consumers protected as we make our way through this pandemic.
Well, I think there's an open question about how long we're going to be in this situation. And by that, I mean, how long are we going to be working remotely? I recognize in a lot of states, many employees have gone back to their offices. Here in Virginia, we haven't. And it's not just the state insurance department, it's state agencies overall, and a number of private businesses. And all of our domestic insurance companies, I'm not aware of one whose employees have gone back to work. Again, staff was not prepared to work at home for long periods of time. A lot of them don't have ideal places to work, whether it's limited office space or a place to do their job, or the distractions that come with being at home. It's an ongoing challenge that we have to deal with. Another thing we found to be a challenge that may not be immediately obvious, we're still hiring people as folks retire, and some have looked at the pandemic and the fact that they're home as a reason for retiring. We've had to replace them with new employees, and there is a real challenge with integrating these new employees who have come on board during the pandemic. It's extremely difficult to train them remotely over Zoom. It probably won't surprise you to learn. So we're still trying to figure that out and adjust to that, but that's an ongoing challenge. The lack of reliable internet, that has not been solved. Again, the folks who have to commute formerly commuted to state offices from rural areas surrounding the Richmond area, we still have issues with that again, we can only address in a limited way. I think it goes back to when you talk about this issue, the length of time before a reliable vaccination for COVID-19 is available, and who will get the vaccine. Again, when will we all be in a position where we at least have a choice to decide when it's safe to come back in the office? Because right now, I think, again, at least in Virginia, the idea is that it's not ideal to come back in the office, and whether we like it or not, or whether it's ideal or not, we all will be working remotely for the foreseeable future. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of the future challenges that concern myself and my staff. And I think I'll end it there.